This panel discussion is called Facilitating a Nuclear-Powered Net Zero Future, and I'm Jennifer Gordon, and I'm the director of the Atlantic Council's Nuclear Energy Policy Initiative. And I'm delighted to welcome our speakers. I also want to call out a special member of our audience today, Fred Kemp, who is here, Atlantic Council President and CEO. Thank you for joining us, and thank you to everyone who's here with us this afternoon. I'm delighted to introduce our panelists. First, we have Adam Guibourgé-Czetwertyński, who is the Undersecretary of State at the Ministry of Climate and Environment of Poland. Anna Birchall, Special Envoy for Strategic and International Affairs at Nuclearelectrica. The Honorable Daniel Poneman, President and Chief Executive Officer of Centrus Energy Corporation. And Joseph McBrearty, President and Chief Executive Officer at the Canadian Nuclear Laboratories. So, Adam, I'd like to start with you because we've been hearing a lot recently about the new nuclear power program and its ambitions in Poland. So could you tell us a little bit about some of your key objectives, please?
Well, the main objective of the program is to facilitate the transition of our energy system towards a clean energy, completely decarbonized. We have the ambition of building a new energy system that would be zero emission by 2040, and it would be relying on renewables and energy storage, but also on nuclear. And in our national program, we have been working on two locations for that program, with a total of 6 to 9 gigawatts of installed capacity. But we've seen also in the recent years an increasing number of private companies, industrial companies in Poland, interested in developing nuclear technology, whether it's large reactors or SMRs, and therefore we're also revising our policy to include those plans. And the main objective of including nuclear beyond decarbonizing the energy sector is also to build energy independence and ensure the competitiveness of our industry by providing a stable source of power with predictable costs.
Adam, thank you so much. And I think from your remarks, but also something that I always say is that I'm an all of the above on technology as long as it's nuclear technology. So Anna, I want to go to you because I know that you are working on refurbishing the reactors at Czernowode, but also on building a first-of-a-kind SMR in partnership with NuScale. So could you talk a little bit about some of the goals and how you're envisioning that mix between traditional nuclear and then the advanced reactors, please?
Thank you so much, Jennifer. Good afternoon and Happy New Year to everybody. I will start by saying that it's an honor as always to be here at the Atlantic Council, and Fred, Jennifer, and all the energy team. It is, the words are not enough to express how wise and smart and timely you are, and in setting up, and you were in setting up this division that you are heading it, talking about the nuclear. Because as we are seeing now, the global, the current global challenges is proving the necessity one more time about the energy being, not just basic human rights, but a matter of security as well. And I'm very proud to share the stage with great friends, but from our part of the world, Romania and Poland. From very early on, as 2019, we were advocating, including publicly, having that courage to say, take away the energy away from Putin's hands because he's using it as a weapon. So coming now to Romania, Romania is a success story when it comes to nuclear. We do have a good energy balance, mixed. We've been very courageous since 1960s, and you imagine the pressures at that time in our region. In 1960s we resisted not to go with the technology of Russia on the nuclear builds. We were with Skandu. We were building the two units with North American technology with Skandu. As you were saying, we have at the present moment two units. The one that you were talking, the first one is going now into the refurbishment. That means you will be adding 30 more years of life to this unit. Plus, we are building 2 more other reactor units, units 3 and 4, so that's an advanced program as well. And we've been very courageous to be the first one in Europe to deploy in partnership with NuScale the SMR. So what I'm trying to say is that I'm very pleased to see that recently nuclear is regaining energy. Nuclear energy is regaining its status as being a clean, affordable a source of energy, and discussions like the one today is showing that it could be a success story. Romania, it is a success story. We in Nuclearelectrica, we have more than 30 years now of operating at the highest level when it comes to safety. And we are very happy to share that experience, not just becoming an operator in the region and beyond, maybe in the Three Seas region, but worldwide to share from our own experience. Because, as I said, I mean, the nuclear energy, it is that source of energy, of clean, reliable source of energy, and this is science, not politics. And people should see it for what it is.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Anna. That's absolutely fascinating. And now that we've heard a little bit about the reactors, I would like to turn to the fuel, because I always like to quote you, Dan, saying that a nuclear reactor without fuel is like an internal combustion engine car without gas, except, of course, you say it better than I do. But so we know that most of the advanced reactor designs that we're looking at are going to require HALEU. So can you give an overview, or maybe just a snapshot, of where we are right now on HALEU and making sure that we have enough for the initial demonstrations that we're looking towards in the next several years?
Great question, Jennifer. And first, I want to thank you and the Global Energy Center and Fred and the Atlantic Council. It is fitting and proper to have this conversation here today, not only because of the thought leadership of the Atlantic Council, but because right here, as we heard yesterday from the stage, United Arab Emirates has been extraordinarily successful in an era in which many countries were still challenged to think about nuclear, to actually build successfully with absolutely first-rate safety, security, non-proliferation standards, and it's a good thing to be thinking about here. My short version of your quote of one of my lines is, no fuel, no fun. And when it comes to the advanced reactors, as you said, and maybe just a sentence of a primer for those who don't know, of the 440 reactors around the world, roughly, I would say roughly 400 use low-enriched uranium fuel. This would actually include some of the newer reactors, such as NuScale, but it would not include the heavy water reactors, such as your CANDU reactors. So of those that require enrichment, the ones that are what we call sometimes fourth generation, that don't use liquid water for a coolant and use either gas or metal, they do need a higher concentration. Think of octane in your car. And so if you get 4 or 5% enrichment for the conventional reactors around the world, and if 90% gives you a very small, powerful reactor in a submarine, we go to just 19.75%. So it's enough to give you more performance, but not so much as to create a proliferation threat. Where are we? Up until very recently, the only source that people thought to go to obtain this high-assay, low-enriched uranium fuel, shortened to say HALEU, was Russia. Obviously, Ukraine has changed everyone's calculation. Nuclear Regulatory Commission has licensed one facility in the United States to produce this kind of fuel, and that is, in fact, our facility in Centrus Energy Corp, formerly part of the U.S. government, and we have a small demonstration cascade of 16 machines we have recently completed constructing under a contract with the Department of Energy. This small cascade, we have just won a contract to operate. The Department of Energy has options to operate it up to 10 years, and that would produce just 1 ton a year. That's not enough. So the Department of Energy has something that they call the HALEU Availability Program that was first launched in the Energy Policy Act of 2020, and in the Inflation Reduction Act, $700 million were authorized and appropriated to support that effort. That is a down payment. It's not enough, but it is a down payment to take this small demonstration cascade and start to build out. The intention of the U.S. Department of Energy is to produce on the order of 25 metric tons of this material a year. which would be enough to make a meaningful contribution to the new reactors that are getting built in the United States under the Advanced Reactor Development Program. Both X-Energy, a gas-cooled reactor, and TerraPower's Natrium reactor, which is cooled by liquid sodium, both could benefit from that kind of production. But we will need private capital, we'll need a public-private partnership. There was an additional $100 million in the omnibus legislation passed at the end of the Congress. But the good news, Jennifer, is while we now finally, after many years of kind of not paying attention to fuel, now it's got everyone's attention. The last thing I'll say, just to put things in context, is the Nuclear Industry Council in the United States for 2 years running has asked a series of questions to people in the industry, and to the question, what is the problem that keeps you up most at night? Twice in a row, the answer has been access to HALEU. So now we have bipartisan support in Congress. We have support at both ends of Pennsylvania Avenue in the Congress and the administration. So our hope is that in this, even though we're in a difficult political environment, that there is enough of a consensus around the need for this fuel to make the contributions to energy that Anna and Adam have described, that we're going to be in a good position to move forward from here.
Thank you so much, Dan. And I want to stay on this theme of advanced nuclear technologies and go to you, Joe. Can you talk to us about the role of the Canadian nuclear laboratories in nuclear innovation, and tell us what you're working on, perhaps, if you can share, that you're most excited about at the moment?
Sure, Jennifer, thanks very much for the opportunity to appear today, and thanks to the Atlantic Council for inviting the representatives from Canada to be able to participate today. We really appreciate it. It was interesting talking to or listening to both Anna and Dan here, because we are either impact from a standpoint of we were the developers of the CANDU technology way back in the 1960s, but today with small modular reactors we actually have a proponent that we are working with that is affected by the availability of HALEU, and are they going to still be able to use HALEU, or will they have to look at something else from a reactor physics design? So it's actually, I think, very appropriate, and I'll just step back a little bit to re-familiarize folks if you're not familiar with the Canadian nuclear program. Canadian Nuclear Laboratories is actually a pretty new company. It's only about 7 years old. It is a follow-on of a thing called Atomic Energy of Canada Limited, which really started back in the 1950s. And if you've heard of Chalk River, and folks in the nuclear industry have generally heard of Chalk River, that is our principal site. And so Chalk River was responsible for the design, construction, prototyping, and then deployment through eventually CANDU Technologies to produce, I think, 19 units of CANDU reactors in Canada, and then I think about 6 or 7 internationally, with 2 in Romania. And so it really is, Canada is a very quiet country sometimes when it comes to, admission or promoting themselves, but this technology has been incredibly valuable and has really assisted not only Canada but the rest of the world. 60% of Ontario, and Ontario is the largest province in Canada, 60% of our energy is produced by nuclear, by operating CANDU reactors. Anna mentioned refurbishments. The reactors within Ontario are undergoing refurbishments today. But the ability to get off of coal, clean up the environment in Ontario in particular has been really key. The key part of that has been the ability to use nuclear and maintain nuclear as a technology. So to get to your question on what's exciting, we are partnering with a company called Global First Power to build the first microreactor in Canada. That reactor will be sited at our Chalk River site, which has a lot of history and is a licensed site. So that process is underway. It is one of 2 reactors underway in Canada, and I think it really is sometimes not recognized all the work that's going on in Canada. And GE Hitachi is working with Ontario Power Generation to build a second or a first as a larger scale SMR at the Darlington site, which is really exciting. And when I look at what's exciting from a technology standpoint, the new reactors, advanced reactors, whether they're a large, small reactor or a micro reactor for remote or industrial purposes really are kind of at the core of what we're doing R&D on. And we are providing the proponents of these reactors with nuclear analysis technologies and analysis of fuels, materials, et cetera. But I think what's even more exciting from an R&D perspective at CNL, we are going to take that data and take those initiatives and move it into a clean energy initiative, clean energy park, where you can actually be able to, and the plan is, to be able to utilize this park to see how that reactor plays with other renewables. How does it play with other offtakes for process heat, hydrogen production, maybe even desalinization. So I think that's really what's going on in the energy world at CNO.
Joe, that's fascinating, and thank you so much. And I think, across the board, those are all issues, that we're looking at as well: nuclear beyond power, other types of beyond SMRs, beyond traditional light water reactors. So, thank you so much for those insights. And I think in terms of framing this conversation, there are sort of three ways in which I'm currently looking at the timeline. The first is the next year between now and COP28. The second is the decade. And then the third is between now and 2050. So how do we reach net zero by 2050? And I think, one of the things that we need to do is really move from a short-term strategy to a longer-term strategy. And so, Adam, I want to turn to you and ask you, what are some of the main challenges that you see as facing Poland's nuclear power program, and what are you doing to address those challenges?
Well, I think there are plenty of experienced here people in the audience with nuclear industry, and so they will all know that nuclear projects are very easy and can be done in a matter of a couple of weeks. And
are they cheap too?
Yeah,
cheap too,
very
right?
cheap too. And at least that's what all the vendors are telling us. They're very cheap. No, but it's true that they're not so expensive. Actually, we did our own math, and when we looked at the whole equation, because that's what you have to do when you look at as the public administration, you look at the cost of the entire system. So you're not only looking at the cost of the generation of energy, but the cost of the grid, the cost of balancing the grid and getting the energy to the end consumers. And when you look at the total cost and you compare actually apples with apples, you can't compare a wind farm with a nuclear power plant. You realize that actually they're more or less the same cost, or even nuclear is slightly cheaper than the combination of different renewables and energy storage and investment in the grids that you would need. And that's also why we are relying in our decarbonization strategy on those pillars. I think that the next steps we are working on currently, because it's, as everyone knows, it's a long-term project to develop those nuclear power plants. It's first of all the permitting phase we're in, with all the very demanding EU legislation we have, making sure that we have all the environmental decisions, all the licensing prepared as it should be, also to ensure the maximum level of safety of these installations in Poland. But trying as a newcomer to this industry, another challenge we are going to be working in the coming month is identifying our needs in terms of the workforce that we need, both for the construction and then for the operation of the site, because we're not so lucky of having already running nuclear power plants. So we know that we will have to train engineers in various fields, electrical and construction, and being dedicated to this project. And so identifying those needs and what do we have available in Poland, what do we have available in the regions, also working together with the US, because we have chosen for this first site the Westinghouse AP1000 technology, which is Americans are working also together with the US on identifying what are the opportunities for those areas where we maybe don't have the competences in our own universities to use also the resources available in America to get, yes, the engineers that we need for this program.
Thank you so much, Adam, for those insights. And Anna, I want to turn to you, again, as we sort of look at this larger strategy, because you and I have had a lot of conversations about EU acceptance of nuclear, about the green taxonomy. And so I'd like to ask you, where do things stand at this moment, and why is it so important that the European Union perhaps changes its official stance on nuclear?
Yeah, thank you so much, Jennifer. And before answering to your question, I just want to say a little bit about the SMR, because as you were mentioning, and I was talking in my first intervention, we had the courage to have the first deployment in Europe of the SMR. At the present moment, we already have the site. It's in Deutsche. We already have the SPV. We already started the permitting. So the work it's quite advanced. And from that point of view, we could share some lessons that we already learned when it comes to our experience and what needs to be done in order to have this mass deployment of the SMRs. And in this, my view, yes, Romania signed up exclusivity with NuScale, but it needs to be said that it's room for all technologies all over the world. And if you want to have to meet the challenges and achieve the goals of decarbonization, nuclear needs to be up right there as being recognized as we were all saying, a source of clean and reliable and affordable source of energy. And it's not just in terms of the energy, but look at the other benefits. When it comes to the hydrogen, look at the benefits to the healthcare industry and so on and so forth. So just 1 minute, because I think it's for the audience, it's very important to see, the lessons that we could learn. Where do you need? You need firstly to have experience, and if you don't have that experience, we are lucky in Romania, we have this experience, but go to the ones that really have experience. Because safety, it's incredibly important. Then you need to start building the supply chain. Then you have to have a good industry regulator. That's incredibly important. And we were talking about sharing and having that based in terms of the best practices. Then obviously you need to have the political and public support. In Romania, we were lucky because we've been operating at the highest level when it comes to safety. We have a good public support, consistent public support, around 80%, but we are not getting complacent. Like, for example, Nuclearelectrica is reaching out now, including to the high school kids, to try to tell them how important it is and how fascinating it is to be working in this industry, because you do need, as Joe was saying earlier, you need to plan, because Adam was mentioning, you need to, nuclear is about long-term commitment, but it's about long-term strategy and strategizing, and taking care of your human resources is incredibly important, because it takes at least 8 years to train a good operator when it comes to the safety. Then you need to have those engineering schools as well. So now coming back to your question and on the taxonomy, we've been battling this. You've been helping a lot, and Atlantic Council, I have now, it's full disclosure, don't kill me, but I'm telling the truth. You've been instrumental in getting the message out, how important it is to have the nuclear included in the taxonomy. We need to say that the Commission, European Commission, was courageous to really include the taxonomy, in the taxonomy, the nuclear along with the gas. It's been quite a big battle. We've been personally involved in getting this through the Parliament. At the present moment, there is this challenge by two countries, Austria being among them, to the European Court of Justice. Don't quote me, but my personal view is it's a kind of a nonsense. So, we will get that out of the court. But why is the taxonomy so important? Why the nuclear is so important to be included in the taxonomy? Because those projects are not, at the beginning, they are quite expensive. When you do the whole analysis and how the energy, produced from nuclear, in terms of the cost, you will realize that actually is one of the cheapest sources of energy. But at the beginning, they are, quite costly. So therefore, you need to have the investment. So having the taxonomy nuclear included in the taxonomy is giving a good incentive to the financial institutions or the private sector to invest. And you were going there on 3 stages, the first year, then the next, and the next. Maybe we will be talking towards the end of this year that we kind of started to educate, if I may speak this way, the financial institutions to really look at financing and supporting the projects in the nuclear. Then one thing that is equally important, and I'm sharing you from Romanian's experience, is the governmental and the political support. In Romania, we have the support from at the highest level, being at the presidential level, government level, parliament level. We just adopted at the cabinet level a piece of legislation that is supporting with state guarantee the nuclear projects in Romania. Now is in the parliament, and it's just a matter of time until it's going to be passed in the parliament, because there is a lot of support for that. So you do need to look at the financing. So yeah, the taxonomy was important, but now we have this instrument. It's for the industry and for people like yourself, Jennifer, to just get the message out and try to tell the financial institutions that it is commercially viable, but likewise, energy, it is strategically important, and in our part of the world you see it as we speak how critical and how important it is. And I will end by saying that we are very proud in Romania that on the nuclear we have no reliance on Russia. And when we are talking now about how do we build the future, let's be careful of not, by killing one source to replace it with another single source. So, you need to diversify. But as I said, in Romania, we are very, very pleased that not that we didn't want to have the Russian technology, but we have no dependency on anything to do in nuclear from Russia. And that's an important lesson.
Anna, thank you so much. And thank you also for bringing up the financing. And I do want to circle back to that in just a few moments. But Dan, first I want to go to you because I think, when we talk about long-term strategy, there are a number of, I think, potential pitfalls along the way. And I think what we call valleys of death, both in terms of innovation and then also in terms of commercialization. So if you could kind of give us your insights into both of those, please.
Sure, I'm happy to. And actually, I don't have to speculate because we have historical data on this. Classically, when you think of the role of government, and I strongly endorse everything Anna just said about the need for both private and public finance, absolutely critical. And by the way, I got to give Anna and her government a shout out, and she was nice to give you a shout out. But were it not for Anna and her efforts in Romania, I'm not sure the taxonomy decision would have gotten made the way it did. And it's hugely important to climate change that it did, so thank you. But classically, the U.S. Department of Energy has invested in very early stage technologies that you can't count on a rate of return that would satisfy private investors. And so many technologies that have been game changers, but in a further time frame have benefited from that, including things not only in nuclear, but fracking and things like that that have had prodigious energy consequences. So think back to the financial crisis of 2000, 2008, 2009. We had a lot of technologies that had already traversed what we call the first valley of death, of just establishing technical viability. Take solar photovoltaic, take electric cars, and had not yet traversed what we called at that point the second valley of death, which was widespread deployment and commercialization. So with the crisis of the Recovery Act, the need to stimulate the economy, at the same time a high priority was now being placed on addressing climate change, the United States Department of Energy, under congressional support, employed this loan guarantee program, which I was the chair of the Credit Review Board as Deputy Secretary of Energy. There were 0 grid-scale photovoltaic plants in the United States at that time. Tesla was still just kind of an exciting idea. And we said to the private sector, we're not trying to displace you. And the private sector, we cannot provide debt at the price and at the tenor for the duration that you need. So the loan program came in with the full faith and credit of the U.S. Treasury, which meant the lowest possible debt price, the highest confidence and full faith and credit of being repaid. And that did what it was supposed to do. It stimulated investment in the first 5 photovoltaic plants in the country at grid scale. That brought private debt and equity in off the sidelines, and then the private sector was able to take over. There's no reason not to run that playbook again, but you need to, because nuclear today, with all of the advanced designs that we're hearing about from our colleagues, all 3 of my colleagues, they're still at that first valley. So we've got technical demonstrations in place, but not commercial deployment. We need to leverage both the private and the public sector to do that. And fortunately, we have continued billions of dollars available and authorized and appropriated funds in the U.S. Department of Energy at the loan program that can leverage those kinds of investments. And we have very powerful and strong leadership. Jigar Shah, I'm sure, has spoken at many Atlantic Council events, and they are eager to help. And so I would just note that when this is done well, as in the case of Tesla, you can not only make the credits available, but sometimes you can even get it paid back. And the last thing I'll say about this, Jennifer, sometimes there's a little controversy about that program. There was one case of default called Solyndra, which unfortunately was used politically to give the program a black eye. The loan program office has a default rate of like 2%. Any commercial lender would be thrilled with the credit record of this. And after all, it was a program that was designed to support innovative technologies. To have that kind of a track record and returning billions of dollars to taxpayers for these investments to get whole industries going, the largest wind farm in the country, all of those solar plants, and yes, Project Vogtle, the one nuclear power plant built in the last 30 years, also benefited from these loan guarantees. So it's a powerful way to bridge the gap between today, when we have a technically demonstrated product, has not survived the second valley of death. We've got to get over the second valley of death if we're going to get to net zero by 2050.
Thanks, Dan. And thanks also for mentioning Jigar Shah, and he is a great friend of the Atlantic Council. And I think that if he were here on this panel, he might take issue with the notion of the valley of death and say instead that they're building a bridge to bankability. So again, that...
Didn't I say that?
Right. Oh, yeah, that's exactly what you said.
My new talking point.
Right. But, I want to stay on this idea, Dan, you talked about the financing life cycle. And Joe, I want to go to you to talk about the nuclear life cycle. So again, as we move from the short-term to long-term strategy, we have to think about everything that goes into nuclear, from mining to conversion to use and then disposal. So could you talk a little bit about how you see Canada approaching the full nuclear life cycle?
So, yeah, thanks for that question. And I think I don't think Canada's going to be a whole lot different than many nations, except for the fact that we mine uranium. We mine a good portion of uranium. We convert uranium. We're actually doing operations in multiple plants. But I think the key thing to keep in mind with respect to nuclear is the life cycle is not 2 weeks, it's not 2 years, it's not 10 years. It's 70, 80, or 90 years, or longer than that. And the topic I'd like to spend just a bit of time on, because it's important before you actually start building a reactor, you need to understand where all the waste is going to go. I will speak a little bit about this because while we are a laboratory and most people think of us as a laboratory, 75% of our budget and work goes to environmental cleanup. So from a standpoint of life cycle, it's very important for the reactor vendors and the regulators to understand what you're going to do with that waste in the design to absolutely minimize it, come up with the right systems, and make sure that you can convince the public, because one of the largest naysayer comments is going to be, well, it's going to last for 10,000 or 100,000 years. My solar panel or wind turbine isn't going to do that. How are you going to address that? And in fact, from a life cycle story, the nuclear industry probably has one of the best stories to tell with respect to waste. It's not going up in the atmosphere. We know exactly what it is. We've been storing it for decades very safely, and we have plans going forward. We have, I think, Finland and Sweden have actually started or emplacing or construction or emplacing waste in a DGR. Canada is in the process of down selecting for a deep geologic repository site. We at CNL, our waste is a little different because we're a laboratory, but we have the ability and the capability to actually solve that problem. And so from a life cycle standpoint, and I think Dan's right in the middle of this life cycle story because of the issues with fuel. For Canada, for the CANDU reactor, it's not a big deal. It's 1%, it's natural uranium. But for everybody else, the ability to get a reliable fuel cycle to new plants in particular is very, very important. And these are in some cases policy decisions. Canada doesn't, import enriched fuel, really, and we're not enriching it there. So these are policy decisions for the Canadian government to look at differently because it has looked at natural uranium as the fuel for CANDU plants. So there are some political aspects for Canada which it's going to have to face, which the United States and the rest of the world have been facing for years when it comes to fuel. And so these are all really important things that typically don't necessarily go into the story when people are trying to sell a small modular reactor. The fuel is incredibly important. The waste, the final product, because it lasts so long and people put it out of their mind, is an important part of this as well. And there's just two more things I just want to comment on here, because I think Anna brought it up. It's people and human resources. It takes 8 years to qualify the senior reactor operators at plants. It takes a lot of time, training, and human capital to get a safe, reliable, dependable operating system that the public can trust. That does not happen overnight. And that is another life cycle cost and investment that people generally don't think that you have to make. But I will tell you, from my experience in the U.S. Navy for 30 years, if you don't know how to operate a ship or a reactor, and you don't do it well, you will not survive, and it will have a negative impact on the entire industry. And that is so very important. And one just last thing, I think Adam mentioned it with simplicity, or the designs. Well, I guess the process early on is thought to be simple. There was a paper written, a 2-page paper back in the 1960s, written by Hyman Rickover, who was the father of the U.S. nuclear Navy. And he compared the academic reactor to the practical reactor. And the difference in the academic reactor, it was cheap, it was light, it was easy to build, it was completely safe. And it required hardly any people. The real reactor, as we know today, when you look at it, does not really operate that way. You need a lot of extra parts. So I think it's really important as we go forward in proposing, and in analyzing what reactor plants we're going to use, that practical, no kidding, reactors are hard to design, they're hard to operate, and you have to get past the PowerPoint presentations, you have to get past sometimes the sales. So.
Well, thank you so much. And, when we talk about getting past the PowerPoint, I think, one of the main issues is how do we overcome whatever barriers may be in the way so that nuclear can really realize its full potential in time to do something about climate change. So, Adam, in terms of barriers, I want to ask you, could you elaborate on local and national public support for nuclear power in Poland?
Well, we have quite a good support for nuclear in Poland, and we're doing every year an analysis in the ministry, and since a few years the support has been growing. It always was a majority of the population it was supporting, and in the last study that we did at the end of last year, we reached about 85% of support for nuclear technology in Poland. It is also a project that is very much supported across the board and across the whole political scene. When I go to Parliament and I have to defend, and I was recently presenting a law that was introducing some changes to the permitting phase, and it had support from all political parties, because everyone in Poland understands the strategic importance of that investment in terms of energy security, in terms of the competitiveness of our economy, and just being able to provide clean energy in the long run. So there is white spot. It's not by accident. It's because also we do spend a lot of effort to inform the population, to pay attention also to make sure that we do take all the steps necessary to ensure proper design, safe operation of the plant in the long run, and looking at the whole life cycle, including the waste part. And when we look as well at locations, we try to also engage with local communities to make sure that we don't choose a location where there is no support for that technology, and that is also important in ensuring a broad support in the society. And obviously, without that broad support in the society, you are not able to conduct these type of projects, and there are examples of that in Europe. And I think it's in the context of the challenges of climate change, it is really a pity, because all the examples we have, and I think Ontario is probably one of them, all the examples we have in the world of countries that manage to decarbonize their energy system have done it with a combination basically of renewables and nuclear. So it's clear to us that there is no other way to achieve our climate goals than this one, and therefore public support is something terribly important.
Adam, thank you so much. And Anna, my question for you is about how you're thinking through challenges on financing for the new SMR. But because Adam brought up public opinion in Poland, I was wondering if you could also share your thoughts on why public opinion for nuclear is so high in Romania as well.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Jennifer, for bringing this up. As I was saying, we took a strategic decision since 1960s to have the nuclear in our energy mix. And at the present moment, with the 2 units, we are counting of 18 to 20% from the energy need of Romania. Imagine if we are doing now, when we will complete the other 2 more units plus the SMRs. So practically Romania has a great potential to not just be independent in terms of the energy, but be an exporter of energy security in our region. And as we speak, we are helping Republic of Moldova, for example. So that's been a strategic decision, and because why is the public support so high? It's because we've been operating it at the highest level when it comes to professionalism, responsibility, and taking care of the safety. Safety is up there. Likewise, we develop a supply chain when it comes to to all the pieces together. We're investing heavily in the education. We are training our people. Actually, in Cernavoda, we have our own training facility. For example, with the SMRs, we are now going to have a training modular of SMR to really use it for training purposes. But we are not complacent. Are we facing the fake news all the time, especially with the SMRs? Yes. Are we in the middle of a hybrid war in our region? Yes, we are. Are we addressing those worries with responsibility? Yes, we do. And that's why the public support is so high, because, as I said, we operated it in a very professional and very, very secure environment. And that's why we want to share that experience, because unless you have that experience, you don't know, it's something that Romania has. It's a wealth that Romania is prepared to share it. and count on us, and that's why I strongly believe that Romania, through Nuclearelectrica, will be one of the main operators in our region on the North American technology and the SMR technology. Now, on the financing. As I was saying, look, financing, we have the taxonomy, but likewise, I think at the national level, at the governmental level, but at the financial institutions, World Bank, IMF, all the other financial institutions, they need to look at, at the investing and helping the new builds or the projects in nuclear, because they are not going to be seen just commercially, from the commercial point of view, which again, if you do the math, it's actually very viable in terms of, on the balance sheet, commercially speaking, but it is geostrategically important because energy, it is a source of, it's a matter of security, national and regional and geostrategically, a matter of security. I was looking at my notes, so practically if, nuclear needs to be fully recognized as a factor of energy security and stability and decarbonization, and investing now in nuclear new builds will reduce the cost of energy transition by an estimated $1.6 trillion US, which, by the way, represents the cost increase if we don't change the status quo. Now, in our case, we've been partnering with US. At the last COP, we have we received the letter of interest from the US EXIM to finance our projects in nuclear, $3 billion. We are in advanced process, with Canada as well. And I was telling you the Romanian support, the national support. So we are doing our bit. So I guess in terms of the financing, yes, it is, it can be seen as being challenging because they are a little bit expensive at the beginning if you just look at the numbers. But again, when you look at the end and all the benefits, it is one of the most reliable and affordable source of energy. So I guess my conclusion is at the national and international level, we do need to see nuclear for all the benefits that have, not just on the energy front, but on the, as I said, on the hydrogen production, on the health, on the research, and so on and so forth, and a matter of security, because that's all about. It's a matter of security, and it's a very affordable, reliable, and predictable source of energy. And you need to strategize. I guess the word in order, when it comes to the nuclear projects is strategizing, having the courage to strategize and have that commitment from all the stakeholders, being governmental, international community, and private sector. This will be, it's a common fight to secure the energy, but it's a common great project.
Anna, thank you so much. And when we talk about barriers or potential barriers and challenges, one of the challenges that we're facing is how do we get the benefits of peaceful use, but without weapons proliferation risk? And Dan, I think I see a copy of Double Jeopardy, which you've written. So we're lucky that you've written the book about it. Please share your insights with us.
I'll save you time. Just buy the book. No. It's true. My first 20-plus years in this business was on the nonproliferation side. And that is the existential question that we face. How can we leverage the prodigious carbon-free qualities of nuclear energy without unleashing the terrors of nuclear proliferation? And fortunately, there are a lot of good answers to this. We're coming up on the 70th anniversary on December 8th of this year of Atoms for Peace. And the notion of sharing this technology for peaceful purposes, but regulating it with a robust series of safeguards enforced through a very highly credible International Atomic Energy Agency, this system has worked. The prediction of John F. Kennedy of 25 nuclear weapon states by 1970 obviously did not pan out. We have some very tough cases out there, Iran, North Korea, and others that we are dealing with. But the real question today is, if we are to realize the ambitions that you're hearing from all of my colleagues on this panel, and the ambitions of people like Fatih Birol and the International Energy Agency to double or even triple the nuclear fleet to meet net zero by 2050, how can we do that? Well, the most vulnerable aspect in terms of the possible proliferation of nuclear weapons is in the fuel cycle, and in the fuel cycle specifically in the area of uranium enrichment. And I see Ana Palacio out there, one of our common friends and colleagues, Ernie Moniz, and I, 20 years ago almost, wrote an article that said, look, if you look at the economics of the fuel cycle, it doesn't make sense to invest the billions in enriching uranium unless you have 20, 25 reactors. Very few countries meet that test. How do we then allow the propagation of peaceful nuclear energy without the threat of nuclear weapon proliferation? Well, if you get an international consortium together, investing perhaps in a single plant, perhaps in a place like the United States, which has impeccable non-proliferation credentials, and then make that fuel available far and wide, maybe that's how you can skin this cat. We thought, Professor Moniz then and I, that it was a good idea then. I still think it's a good idea, but the interesting thing is now, when you have many more people on climate change grounds looking at a very robust expansion, there's discussions going on at the G7. I'm getting lots of calls from people in Central Europe, because let me just say one simple factoid, which is 46% of the world's enrichment capacity resides in Russia. And most of the dependents on that supply are looking for resilience and alternative sources. There's only 4 enrichers in the world today, Russia, and they're all state-owned enterprises, Russia, China, France, and a European consortium known as Urenco. So the world needs more supply, and it needs more suppliers. So we believe that if you put together this kind of consortium and you would enable many different governments and sovereigns and owners to invest in it, in return for those investments, not so much come out equity checks, but energy security in the form of enriched uranium they need to supply the world's reactors. This is a way to get the benefits of prodigious carbon-free nuclear energy without inhering undue risk and actually minimizing the threat that that technology is going to leak out and lead to nuclear weapons proliferation in third parties.
Dan, thank you so much. For just one more moment, I want to return to the notion of public opinion and community engagement. Joe, because I know you've looked a lot at these issues, so I'd like to hear your insights into how we reach the public.
Thanks, Jennifer. I'll just lay down a fact here. At CNL today, we have, I think, 4 or 5 major EAs or EISs underway. And that is for disposal facilities, reactor disposal, small modular reactor, construction, et cetera. And the need to communicate to the public, the need to communicate early to the public, especially if you're going to do something different, if you're going to do something new, is just extraordinarily important. And it has to be, it cannot be an ad hoc approach. In Canada, over the last few years, with follow-on of the UNREP, or United Nations Declaration for Rights of Indigenous People, has had a significant impact on the country's ability to execute major projects, nuclear being one of them. And the ability of the proponent, and I would just say in our case for us, because we have multiple ones of these, and the regulator to actually get to a point where the regulator can approve a license, a significant portion of our interface to get that license done is based on indigenous engagement. And that has morphed over the last, well, it continues to morph, I would say, every day. But it has changed dramatically over the last 4 years in particular. And you know, what we have learned, and many countries don't necessarily have this particular issue, but some do. And especially as you go into the developing world and you want to export reactor technology, you want to export an SMR or microreactor or whatever, the ability to gain public trust, confidence, and ability to get buy-in from the public or indigenous groups in our case is incredibly important. And when you talk about waste, that's really not an easy topic. I'll just tell you for the indigenous population in the northern portion of Canada, the term uranium means the rock that kills. So you have to get past that with the population, and that's important to do. Now, not everyone has to face that issue, but especially as you go into new areas where people are not used to this, especially in developing worlds, with the United Nations Declaration, it has significant impact. And so I guess my message to folks is, if you're going to do it, if you're going to expand into areas where nuclear is not necessarily a common term or a common word, you need to plan ahead. And you need to be ready to go in, ready to engage, not go in with the ability to dictate that this is what it's going to be. Because that's what we have found has been a very difficult position to propose to people. The decision is already made on where it's going to go, what it's going to do, etc. So every country is different, but that is and I don't think it's uniquely Canadian, because I think we'll see it around other parts of the world. But communication, community engagement, public engagement is really important, especially as you start to go down from this academic reactor down to the actually licensing for a site to construct and operate a practical reactor.
Joe, thank you so much. And so, unfortunately, we're nearly out of time, but I want to do one quick lightning round, because in the next year, we'll be at COP in December, COP28, here in the UAE. And so my question is, if you could give a 15-second closing statement to end COP28 on nuclear, what would it be?
Oh, on nuclear.
On nuclear, yes. So what would you hope to see from COP28 on nuclear at the end of COP this year?
Well, if we can get the recognition of the role of all technologies, all zero carbon technologies, in achieving our climate goals, that would be terrific.
Thank you so much, Anna.
Until the COP, I would like to see concrete steps in concrete deliverables when it comes to including the nuclear in the energy mix, and that the nuclear not to be seen as the bow in the room, but for its benefits, proven benefits. I would like to be in a panel with you to discuss, to do a review of the year and what we achieve, and to plan and give homework to what needs to be done for the next year. And what would I say? I would say that the climate change is a reality. I think the nuclear, it's a core of addressing the challenges of the climate change, but it's at the core of fulfilling the goals. And I will close by saying that it's a common fight that we should fight together, because it's a fight for survival. It's a fight for our future, practically.
Anna, thank you so much. Dan?
I would say to achieve net zero by 2050, we want to see twice or 3 times the deployed nuclear capacity. Let's go from 400 gigawatts globally to 800, or ideally 1,200. Maybe we can round off at 1,000.
Sounds like a great idea, great plan. And Joe?
I guess what I would say is, I would like folks to understand that nuclear should be considered renewable in some form or fashion. And when leaders get out there and talk about it, nuclear should roll off their tongue just like solar and wind.
Exactly.
Thank you. And so now I'm delighted to invite everyone to a coffee break. Please come back for the main stage at 4 o'clock. We'll be having a panel discussion on the critical mineral supply chain. And please also join me in thanking our panelists.
And thank you to you as well.
Thank you.
Thanks.